Hi, this is Suzanne. I wanted to make this tutorial because there were quite a few folks that were a little confused by this cardiovascular system question that you're seeing right here. And the reason for that was that there's no single place that gives you the whole answer. And so you can't just go find the answer. You actually had to put information together from a couple of different places, and that can be a little difficult to do. And so I wanted to walk you through the process of answering these more complex type of questions. All right, so here you're seeing the entire question in front of you. And the very first thing to do is to read through the question and just pick out things that you already know. All right, so right here we have flow of blood through the cardiovascular system. Well, all right, so I know cardiovascular is heart and blood and that sort of thing, so I kind of know that. All right, outline the flow of blood from alveoli. I've seen that in the respiratory system, right? So that refers to lungs, something in the lungs, right, if you remember from respiratory. Okay, then color code, demonstrate oxygenated. So one of the things I remember from the lungs is that that's where blood gets oxygen, right? So oxygenated should start triggering something about, okay, this is where blood is getting oxygen. We mentioned lungs here. So this is something about blood and lungs. And then deoxygenated, you might have to look up, but this means without oxygen. And so I don't know that yet, but we'll get there, right? All right, then indicate portions pulmonary, systemic. I haven't seen these before. These are all words that are new. So, okay, so I don't know much of this down here, but I do know, okay, cardiovascular, I remembered that. I do know what alveoli is. I know this is where the blood picks up oxygen. And so this must be something about lungs and the heart. All right, so now we go to the instructor's introduction and to the textbook. And in the instructor's introduction, there's this picture here, okay? And notice it says here pulmonary and systemic, right? So if you remember here, that's part of the question. So this has given me a clue that this probably has some information that I need. But we're going to ignore this for a minute and focus, okay, here's the lungs. I know that was important. So if we follow the arrows, right, so here's lungs, blood goes this way to the heart, then out here, then through the body, then back in here, back to the heart and to the lungs. All right, so now let's take this apart a little bit. What I have from this picture is we start in the lungs. We go to the pulmonary vein, right? That's the next place we go. Then we go to the heart. Then we go out the aorta. Then we go to all these bits in the body. And the question doesn't ask you to identify all of these, so I'm just going to ignore them and just call them all body. And then we all go back to the vena cava, back to the heart, pulmonary artery, and then we're back in the lungs. So basically all I've done is I've taken this picture and outlined it step by step. So now I'm going to go back to my question. All right, so I have my little step-by-step chart that I made, and I go back to the question. And I look at what have I already completed. So I've already completed this alveoli back to the alveoli, right? Now, in my original part, right, so when I first wrote this, I wrote lungs. And here the question is asking alveoli, but I know that's really the same thing because it's the alveoli that are the functional unit of the lungs. So I'm just going to add that in here, and that takes care of this part of the question. Okay, so now the next part of the question says, where is the blood oxygenated and where is it deoxygenated? And again, this was from the picture, so if we go back to the picture, notice here the red is oxygenated blood. The blue is deoxygenated, and so I can actually lay that right over my flow chart here. So we can do that. So these were all the oxygenated structures. Whoops, sorry about that. These were all the deoxygenated structures. So notice I've done that part now. All right, what's next? Indicate which portions are part of the pulmonary circuit and which part of the systemic circuit. So again, if you go back to this picture, it has those terms over here, and now I can start to kind of figure out what's happening. All right, so pulmonary circuit is from the heart to the lungs and back. Systemic circuit is from the heart to the body and back. And so now I'm going to lay that out over my chart here. So this is what I had written before, And now I'm going to overlay, okay, I know this is all systemic circuit, so heart to the body and back, and then heart to the lungs and back, that's all pulmonary circuit. So that takes care of that part of the question. All right, I'm almost done, right? See how this is working? So one step at a time. It's kind of a slow process, but you had a good part of the week for this. Okay, so let's see here. We've got these terms. Let's see how many of these terms we've used. Didn't use atrium or ventricle. Alveolar capillaries. Well, I didn't use that term, but I did use alveoli. And remember, the alveoli are those little pouches in the lungs that exchange gases with the capillaries around them. So the alveolar capillaries, that must be these structures here. This is where blood gets oxygenated. So that's those. Body capillaries, we use that. Good. Aorta, yep, there it is. Vena cava, yep, there it is. These valves, I didn't use those or the rest of these. Okay, so I cross out all the terms that I've used, right? Changed alveoli to alveolar capillaries, checked off everything I used, and that leaves me with a few more terms. All right, so now I go back to the book. And in the textbook, there's this nice picture that shows you a little bit more detail on the flow of blood. So here's blood in the lungs. It goes in through the pulmonary veins, which I have right here. Right, so here's pulmonary vein to the heart, but this specifies it actually goes to the left atrium first, and then the left ventricle, and then it goes out to the body. And when it comes back from the body, it goes to the right atrium and then to the right ventricle. All right, so I can add that in. So notice right here I added atrium and ventricle, atrium and ventricle. And I can cross those off up here. There, so we've crossed those off. And now we're only left with two more terms, atrioventricular valve and semilunar valve. And that's not in that picture, so let's go back to the book. So the textbook has this really nice picture of the heart. And right here's the left atrium and the left ventricle, and I can see everything really clearly. Here's the aorta. And there's some valves here, but they don't use the same terms. So this, I don't know, this isn't the same valves, right? So I'm going to have to dig a little bit more. So what you want to do at this point is you'll notice at the top of the textbook is always a search bar. So if you type in atrioventricular valve into the search bar, you get to a page that says advanced heart, right? So you scroll through the results and you get to this page that says advanced heart, and it explains them, right? Okay, so the AV valves, atrioventricular, ensure blood flows from the atria to the ventricles and not the other way. All right, so it should be between the atrium and the ventricle. That's why it's called atrioventricular. And notice here it says the AV valve on the right side is called the tricuspid and the one on the left is called the mitral or bicuspid. Whoops. So if we go back to this picture here, here it is, mitral, that's one of the AV valves. Tricuspid, that's the other AV valve. So these just have different names. And this is a case with a lot of terms in science and in English too, right? There's a lot of terms that are used interchangeably, and so you have to find those links. So AV valves are the mitral and the tricuspid. They're between the atrium and the ventricle. All right. And the semilunar valves are present in the arteries leaving the heart. Okay. So the semilunar valves are between the ventricle and the arteries leaving the heart. So here's my ventricle, here's where we're leaving. This must be the semilunar valve. Here's the ventricle, here's where we're leaving. This must be the semilunar valve. And again, notice these have different names. Pulmonary valve in the system going to the lungs, aortic valve in the system going to the aorta. And they're a little hard to see here, but if you go back to this picture, here's the pulmonary valve, here's the aortic valve. And these are called semilunar because you see how they have these kind of half moon shape? Semi, right? Half, lunar, moon. So that's where those terms come from. All right. So now we go back to our little write-up here. So this is what I've been creating for my homework. So I know the AV valves, atrioventricular valves, are between the atrium and ventricle. So I put that here. And I know the semilunar valves are between the ventricle and the artery leaving. So I put that here, right? And there's one on the right side, and then here's my left side, atrioventricular and semilunar. And that's it. At this point, you've answered the question completely. You want to go back and make sure you haven't missed anything, right? So make sure you've checked off everything. But other than that, this is the end of the question. And as always, if you get stuck, please send me an email, post questions in the Q&A forum. I'm happy to walk you through this at any time. All right, good luck.